So many people do not understand the impacts of abuse and why victims of abuse don't speak up. And that is because of the psychological element to it. And it's so frustrating when there is so much ignorance around this topic and you get comments from people who are belittling it and gaslighting you even more, like, why didn't you leave? Why didn't you speak up? And it's very deep. It's very deep. So I just want to give you some examples, yeah. This first example goes back to the paedophile abuse that I experienced as a young child. I want to give you a bit of insight as to what that created in my mind, right? So that has gone on. That situation has gone on. The grooming, the manipulation. Like, an abuser is not abusive 24/7. That's what you need to understand. And that's what creates cognitive dissonance. They are massively manipulative. And usually it takes time and over time. So it was going on for about a year and things happened. But at the same time as bad things happening, I had built an extremely big emotional attachment to this teacher, in the sense of I knew this was wrong, it was dangerous, I was unsafe. But on other days, he was the teacher. When I started his class, or in his year, I was not very confident. I had loads of things going on, and I also was intelligent, but my brain, the way I'd been taught before, like, the teachers hadn't quite understood me, so it just weren't clicking. Like, none of the mathematical concepts, like handwriting English, all these things, yeah. And he spent so much time with me because, you know, I was his favourite, and he actually was the person who made a lot of things click for me, like, and all of a sudden I was getting much higher grades and understanding maths, doing well in English, doing all of these things. So he had made me start to feel like I needed him, and I was so grateful for him. Like, he was the one that understood me. He was the one, like, and also I didn't really like, had loads of other things going on, like I said, so I didn't like going to assembly. I didn't like be like, just in case, like, so you in assembly there was a chance that you might have to do the projector, or you might get called out in front of everyone, and that used to crack me, the thought of having to stand up in front of people. I hated it. So he knew this, and he'd be like, don't go to assembly today, Laura, you can stay with me, I know it's overwhelming for you. So I'm like, oh my God, he massively understands me. Like, you know, this is going, little did I know why he was keeping me behind for assembly, but it was very, very confusing, very confusing. So when the time come, years later, 3 years later, and the police came round, and had said that they needed me to come down to the station and give a statement, and told me little bits about what had happened and how he'd gone on to another school and been caught. Someone had spoke up in that school. He'd done something worse, because that's also what happens with abusers. They get more and more confident as time goes on. The more they get away with stuff, the more their confidence builds. And something even worse happened at this school that they never actually told me. Anyway, the point was, when I was asked to give a statement, I felt guilty. I felt like, I don't want to get him into trouble. Like, that's not very nice. And the only reason that I gave the statement is because I was still quite young here, and I was actually scared that I was going to get in trouble by the police for not telling the truth. But for a few years after that, and he went to prison and things like that, and a few years after that, I kept thinking, what if I bump into him? Because he didn't go into prison for long, like they never do. Like, it's ridiculous. The systems just are terrible. And I kept thinking, like, what if I bump into him? And not what if I bump into him and I'm going to beat the shit out of him, or tell him about himself, or finally stick up for myself. I was worried that he would have seen the video evidence that I would have given, and he'd be angry with me. He would be angry with me. This is the abuser, the man who has abused me. I'm worried if he's going to be angry with me. So that's one example of how it plays out. Like, so when you say, why don't people speak up, or why don't they say this? It's because of cognitive dissonance. It's because of the manipulation. It's because of the denial. Like, the only way to survive going through abuse is to live in denial. So if you actually think about it, it's not as simple as speaking up about these things. Not just because you're scared of the perpetrator or the abuser, because you actually have some kind, like, you empathize with them, like you have some kind of emotional connection with them, and it's so fucked up. Imagine what that does to you as a person, because then you're thinking, like, why the hell do I empathize with a paedophile? Why the hell am I not wanting to give evidence? I don't want him to get into trouble. Like, he is doing bad things to people. He needs to take responsibility for this. He needs to be held accountable. But I didn't want to do it. I didn't want to do it at all. And in fact, prior to me actually, the police coming to my house years later, I still was unsure if what I'd actually experienced was wrong. Like, I was like so confused because of the cognitive dissonance, because he would do the bad things followed by the good things, bad things, good things. And that's what happens in all abusive relationships. Like I said, abusers are not abusive 24/7. And I actually, from senior school, years later, went to visit him. I actually went back. I got out of that situation. And a year later, I was like, I need to go and visit him. I missed him. The paedophile. Like, to me now, to logical Laura, who has like processed this and gone through this, it seems absolutely crazy. But that's what you need to understand. So people don't speak up because they're confused. Very, very, very confused. And the psychological damage that it causes is so deep and is so misunderstood, that, you know, people need to become aware of that, and how you can like overcome that and stuff like that. It takes a lot of time. Secondly, coming into adulthood, when I was in my abusive relationship with my ex, again, the same things were coming up, you know, like, I knew it was wrong. I knew the way he was treating me was wrong, but he wasn't abusive all the time. And even when he was arrested, even when I did have to go to court, I felt guilt. I felt sorry for him. I could empathise with his pain. I knew why he was doing what he was doing. And this is what I'm trying to get to you, that it is so much deeper than you think, with sexual, physical, mental, emotional, psychological abuse. Like, and when people just say, well, why didn't you leave? Isn't it obvious that that isn't all right? Yeah, it is obvious, but your brain is damaged from the psychological aspect of it. And you saying to someone, well, why didn't they just leave, is so gaslighty. Is just reinforces the belief that maybe I was wrong. Like, you know, why didn't I speak up? And the shame that you feel, that I knew I should have spoke up. I knew, maybe, like the shame with the paedophile, yeah, maybe if I had spoken up, that other girl wouldn't have gone on to endure it. You know, like, you don't think that there's shame from someone who's experienced abuse. You don't think that they already feel fucked up without you saying, well, why? Why didn't you just leave? That's not fucking helpful. It's not helpful. And people need to stop saying that, because they don't understand. And it's so frustrating, like, because I know how much harm that can really cause. And like, people would say to me, well, you married him. You went on to marry, like, I married him and then left him. Well, you know, and you know what? It just reinforced, when I did do that, the smear campaign that took place, because everyone from my ex was able to say, you know, like, oh, Laura has left me. She's got married to me and just left me. And she was doing this and she was doing that. There was a reason. Because I was so confused. So confused of, like, I knew I shouldn't marry him. I knew that what I was experiencing was wrong, but I blamed myself. Like, I was doing things that weren't right to try and escape the abuse. And then I felt shame for that. And then I felt guilt for him. And people saying, why didn't you leave? Why did you get married? Oh, well, you know, I don't know. Like, because I was fucked up, mate. Like, it wasn't because of any of these other reasons. So people just don't understand it. They just don't get it. And it's time now for people to start becoming aware of what it actually means to experience abuse and what it does to the victims, you know, like. And if you ain't got nothing nice to say, don't say it at all. Keep your opinions to yourself, because if someone's not leaving an abuser, there's deeper reasons to it. And sometimes some people can't leave. The repercussions, like leaving my ex, the repercussions of leaving my ex were so bad. I had to endure an intense amount of abuse for the 5 following years, even though he wasn't allowed near me. The abuse didn't stop. You might leave the abuser, but the abuse didn't stop, basically. You know, like, I've now got to a place where it has, because of my boundaries, because of the fact that of my own healing, because of the way I carry myself and stuff like that. But it took a lot of power. Some people just haven't got that in them. They haven't. And they sometimes need to build themselves up to get to that place. Sometimes they'll never build themselves up to the place. So saying to someone, why didn't you just leave? Why didn't you just go to the police? Why didn't you speak up? Think before you speak. Just take that on board.